Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike. I'm Mike and with me as always, putting me off, is Hannah. How the devil are you, darling?
I'm very well, thank you.
So Hannah, what are we talking about tonight, darling?
Tonight we are talking about Midnight on the Firing Line. Synopsis says, from Babylon 5 obviously. Synopsis says, the Narn attack a Centauri colony while raiders attack transport ships. Talia Winters arrives at the station. It is directed by Richard Compton and written by JMS.
It's funny actually, so it's the same writer as the first episode and the same director, which is odd because this is kind of often the first 1 hour episode after a pilot is kind of almost like a soft reboot of the show. So to have the same director come back who to do something so that we will see is so different to the pilot is a really interesting choice. But I guess they understood the production at this point.
I haven't had a look forward, but does he do a lot for B5?
I don't know with B5. It's such a writers and actors shows. I don't really know much or anything about the regularity of the directors. I know there's a director called Mike Vihar who... Vihar, yes. It's it's spelled V-E-J-A-R, so I thought it was Vijar. But I don't know that much about the directors. I think really, I do think of this more as a writer's show, but we will see. Anyway, we've got a lot to get through this evening.
We do.
We're not going to mess around. I got a little bit of feedback, and on that...
we have a lot of feedback, actually,
okay.
Mainly because my iPhone updated and my email wasn't showing YouTube comments for a while. So bear with.
So if you want to send us feedback, you can do so at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Or alternatively, if you view us on YouTube, you can just leave comments right here on the channel. And if they feel feedback-ish, I didn't do the animated thing.
I know.
If they feel like feedback in nature, then we will read them out on the show as we will in a moment. And also a reminder that you should also check out our friend shows, namely Chinstroker vs. Punter, his film, her movie, The Good, the Bad and the Odd, Talk With That Rhythm podcast, Entertainment Landfill, and Film Bastards. And we also very much appreciate positive reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for the audio podcast consumers amongst you, the gentle listening public. So Hannah, what you got for us?
Okay, this is quite a long one. It's a feedback on Twin Peaks: The Return, Part 10.
Okay.
This is from someone on YouTube called Noel Ma.
Okay.
I disagree that evil is more motiveless here, though you are probably right about its stupidity. I suppose the motiveless evil has spread more in a way, but it was always there. That's Bob for you. Drugs and violence obviously give people power as well as money and pleasure, even when more distilled or hidden, which they were in the first 2 seasons. Leo and Leland/Bob didn't abuse others just because they wanted to get laid. They did so because of the power and or to take out their anger. You have mentioned Bob versus Doppelkoop. I love that, Doppelkoop. And it's interesting how Richard resembles Bob more than Doppelkoop, his chaotic and reckless energy, even according to Bob's cohorts. But he's not a spirit, so he faces consequences and is impulsive to the point of idiocy. Richard is clearly very lost and angry, and his extremely evil behaviour is also, unfortunately, very realistic. It's so hard to believe the kinds of things people do and say in real life, but it's almost always very much watered down in movies or TV, or it's portrayed in an exploitative or even propagandistic way. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, no, so that's a really
as
smart
someone
point.
who watches a lot of true crime, I would say that's a very on-the-money statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as far as this idea of motiveless, or it's tricky because I think it's semantics ultimately, and I think that what I mean is that there's 2 types of evil in Twin Peaks. There's primal evil, evil in an almost mythological, animalistic, so that's motivated by lust and power and all these things. But then you've got the other kind of evil, not eagle, yeah, Eddie the Eagle. The other type of evil that is associated more.
Imagine Eddie the Evil.
Yeah, a goatee on that chin. My God. But there's another kind of evil in Twin Peaks, which is much more associated with criminality. And I think that these are two different things. And I think evil might be the wrong word. I think it's more the violence of criminality that I'm speaking to. Because I think it's that in the original series, and I think this is a sign of the times of when the show was made, a lot of the criminality is almost associated with capers, with cons and deals and business ventures.
Like subterfuge.
Yeah, exactly. And there's obvious gains. But also, you do have things like Bob and Leland and these force of nature, which are, I think, just representing our more base values as well. So I think a lot of it is just a matter of perspective. What I think is different, not different, but what I think is rawer in the return is the fact that it's just so much less predictable and so much more sudden and just much harder to psychoanalyze and predict. And again, the analogy that I use is it's the difference between, say, the mafia, who are, organized crime, literally it's in the name, and who have structure and hierarchy. They're still dangerous and scary and you don't want to mess with them. It's like comparing them to somebody like the Unabomber, where or a crazed sniper. And the motivations that lead to those things may come from base places, but I think that the way that they manifest themselves are very different and affect us differently as people who fear those things. Because with the mafia, it's more, I wouldn't want to get involved in that. Whereas a crazed sniper or the Unabomber, there's nothing you can do. It could just happen to you, And I think that's the difference for me.
And a base place is where you might find Ace Mace.
Hey, you're a woman of your word. But thank you. That was really insightful and smart and impossible to disagree with.
Keep it coming.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Our next comment is on our episode of The X-Files Ice, which is season 1, episode 8. It was one of our sorbet watches.
It was.
I'm
now back in the rhyming. I'm like, I'm thinking, because ice rhymes with a lot of stuff. I'm just saying.
So this is from Robert Edson 2374. The ending reminded me of the scene in X the Unknown when Dean Jagger, I nearly said Gene Dagger, learns that they're going to fill the crevice with a couple of feet of concrete. LOL.
Yeah, that's a sci-fi thing, isn't it? It's the kind of fill it up and salt the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's 100%. A good point. X the Unknown is a hugely influential science fiction film. All right, thank you for that. What else you got, Hannah?
Okay, so this is again on Twin Peaks The Return, part 11. Billy Gustafson, 19, sorry about that. Me personally, I think they wrote it as a 9-episode season, but Lynch being Lynch, he shot more material than they expected, so they extended it to 18 episodes because he shot enough that it would work. Yeah,
and that makes sense because the conventional wisdom is that 1 page of script is 1 minute of screen time.
Yeah.
And that's how budgets are made. But as we know, 1 page of Mark Frost might not translate to 1 minute of David Lynch. I think that's what happened there.
Very true. There are a couple of lovely YouTubes just saying that the X-Files documentary has been a great watch as well.
It's done well. It's got about 30,000 listeners now, views, that has.
Fantastic.
It's got copyright stuff in it, though, so we're not seeing a dime.
Okay, we have Silver Surfer says.
Hey, Silver
I haven't
Surfer.
been able to sing that for such a long time.
Hello, buddy.
Hey, bub. Okay, so on your short video, Rest in Peace, David Lynch, he says, you were the first person I thought of when I heard we lost one of the greats.
I have had a few people tell me that.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes, we're very sad about it.
Yeah, it sucks.
From Kim Rice 394 on the X-Files full series documentary, Steve Railsback does so good. I just believe he's unhinged.
Yeah, that's Dwayne Berry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Here's our first feedback on a Babylon 5 pilot episode.
Oh, we got some Babylon 5 feedback. That's all right.
Okay, this is from someone called CPMF 2112.
I'll tell you, with a name like that, you are destined to be on YouTube.
Let's call him Chaz.
Okay. All right, Chaz.
All right, Chaz. Okay.
And again,
or it might be Chazina.
No, Chaz is short for Charlotte as well. So it's an androgynous name.
Androgynous
I
name.
thought
Fantastic.
that you were being really clever and that's why you picked it.
No.
Well, stop clock,
just
twice a day.
First name that came into my head.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Works out well.
JMS has a different storytelling style where he will frequently reveal the end of some events ahead of time, but not how we got there, leaving that discovery as a mystery to be explored by the viewers. So he spoils it himself, but like a magician, there are layers to that ending which alter your perception of it.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So true.
Yeah. Particularly even on Rewatch, which sounds like it shouldn't be possible, but that's a real magic trick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They go on to say, it isn't a rumour that Paramount plagiarised JMS. He left the B5 show Bible with them for over a year with no reply, and then they gave it back with a no thanks. Fast forward a couple of years and JMS was able to make a deal with Warner Brothers to make B5, and suddenly Paramount announced DS9 with an amazing number of similar elements, including direct names.
Yeah, Ducat. Both have got a character called Ducat in them as well.
The DS9 producers mined the B5 show Bible for ideas and fed them to the writers. Paramount also tried a number of dirty tricks to block B5 from being distributed, including tying Star Trek broadcasting rights to not showing B5.
Wow.
This crap went on for a couple of years until Majel Barrett stepped in and made them stop.
Good on her. Good on old Laxana Troy. And it's also worth pointing out that this was a fun part of the interview is Patricia Tallman was on Star Trek and Babylon 5 at the same time.
Yeah.
She was working on Deep Space Nine and Voyager as a stunt double, but also as an actor whilst shooting Babylon 5.
Yeah.
So she was friends with all of them.
Much of a crossover.
Yeah. But her view was that if that did happen, it happened at kind of an executive level.
Yeah.
And she was
makes sense.
So she was pretty sure that the writers of the show were aware of Babylon 5, but what she said to me was she talks about how busy you are and how full the days are. And she said people who make television don't watch television.
Mm. They go on to say JMS has video explaining this in great detail here on YouTube, and that several Star Trek actors confirmed it to him. Paramount is notoriously litigiant. If it wasn't true, they would absolutely have taken it down and sued JMS for publicly saying it. They know it's true. That's really interesting. Thank you.
I love both shows.
The
so
tidbits coming.
I think there's room for both.
Yes. Me too. I like both. But yeah, like it's not cool to take somebody else's work, guys.
Douchey move, isn't it?
In that respect, sharing is not caring.
No, it's not.
Okay, this is another one from Chaz. It is writing trick by JMS. This isn't the beginning of the story. He starts off at the end of the beginning and hints at prior events in history and then fills them in as the show goes on. That's very true, and probably goes back to what you were saying about how he kind of reveals the end and then layers it through.
One of the big formative events of the whole of Babylon 5 is the Battle of the Line, which you don't actually get to see until a movie that's released between the 4th and 5th season. Yeah. So it's, they're all talking about this thing that happened. And it's great because they always say that you should show, not tell. And one of the things that people accuse television of is telling. Famously Star Trek, you'd always get the people looking at these incredible battles on the view screen, but we don't get to see them because they can't afford to do them. But JMS, I think even if he had all the budget in the world, he'd still prefer to tell us because he likes the idea of mystery. But his approach to mystery is very different to people like J.J. Abrams, which is a mystery box. His approach to mystery is more about uncovering character and uncovering. It's more of an exploratory discovery than a magician's reveal.
And that's it. That's all the feedback we have for today.
And we are back. So we've just finished watching Midnight on the Firing Line, the first episode of season 1 of Babylon 5. Hannah, initial thoughts on this episode?
I I'm sure I'll get over this soon, but I just have so much excitement every time an episode starts. I see a character and I think, oh, that's right, that happens, and that happens, and that happens, that happens. For the first probably 5 minutes, this
is the one where
like this little fangirl, like, oh, I can't wait till we get to that bit, and oh, I can't wait till we get to this bit. Yeah, it was great. I really like this episode. It's a good flavour of the way JMS manages to tie a theme across an episode that sort of seems to be like a standalone, in as much as a B5 episode has a standalone. I really like the message of avoid the propaganda, focus on what you can see.
Yes.
And I think, given the way the world is today, you could absolutely make that case for everything in life. Don't believe everything you see on YouTube.
Yeah. Fake news. And the other theme of this episode is this idea of generational violence as well, and the sort of the cycle.
Where does it end?
Yeah, this idea, like reclamation of old properties and colonialism, and just this idea of it being a never-ending cycle. That's the other theme.
Just that kind of realization that at some point someone has to be the bigger person.
Somebody has to let something go.
Let it go. And we don't know at this stage what is going to happen in terms of anyone backing down or not backing down or whatever. But it's definitely a theme, regardless of where you live and all that kind of thing. It's just something that you come across, and you see it through all the various different little storylines. You've got, Talia.
They cram a lot into 45 minutes.
When she's explaining about her mother, there's Talia saying, well, that's the law and that's what cycle's there for, and Ivanova saying, yeah, but this is my experience of it, and we're probably not going to get off on the right foot tomorrow. And
they're also doing a huge amount of world building. You're learning about cycle, and you're learning about the politics of the world. I mean, what we're seeing here, when Ivanova talks about, a man in a grey suit coming around every week, we're not in Star Trek.
No.
It almost feels like Babylon 5 is aspiring to get to where Star Trek is culturally, and sociologically. And it almost feels at this point, I remember feeling like this is, although obviously I don't mean this literally because they're set in different universes, it feels like Babylon 5 is how we get there. It's those final important steps of, like you say, letting stuff go.
Like the flashback episodes that Star Trek have.
When things are still a bit shitty.
The ghetto areas and stuff.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Like the Sanctuary District.
Sanctuary District, that's it. It does feel a bit like getting to that sort of...
Utopia.
Yeah, utopia, that's the word I'm looking for. But I loved it. I thought it was so solid for a first episode. Did you think so solid, Crew?
I did, yeah.
Immediately, as soon as I said it. I would give this episode...
Are we rating now? Is this a thing?
I think in terms of where I see like how much I enjoyed it, I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think there was room for stuff to happen, but also really sated my enjoyment. What about you?
Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously the main thing with this episode is just how aesthetically different it is to the pilot. It looks different. It's really nice watching Babylon 5 in HD because when we last watched it, we watched the DVD versions. The DVD versions are pretty horrible because what they do is they forced it to look widescreen, whereas here they've maintained the 4:3 that it was broadcasting. So on the DVDs, they've zoomed in, so you lose the top and the bottom of the image so they can make it appear widescreen. And you also lose resolution because you're zooming in on something. You'll lose, and also the special effects have there's this weird thing that happens whenever there's an optical shot. Whereas this has none of that. It's in the original broadcast ratio and it's in 1080p and it just looks great. But also the show itself, like the costuming and the environments look like Babylon 5.
Yeah.
You know? And also, of course, we've got Ivanova,
who's fantastic right from the very first minute.
Yeah, you've got basically they've fixed all the problems.
Honestly,
with the pilot.
caliber of acting, just across the board, is so high.
Yeah.
Londo's, when he's talking to Sinclair about the dream of when he dies and all of that, it's just the delivery of it is so fantastic.
There's about 5 or 6 scenes in this that in most TV shows would be the best scene in an episode.
Yeah.
And they're so well constructed and it's so rewarding as well. I mean, we've said before that Babylon 5 is probably the poster child for the Rewatch Project because with the possible exception of Twin Peaks, I don't know if there's a TV show that is enhanced so much through a rewatch because so much of the power of those scenes is because I keep thinking of Mark from The Good, Bad and the Odd watching this for the first time and he's probably thinking it was all right, it was okay, but of course we're watching this informed by the knowledge of what's to come and seeing it within that context and seeing a little bit of the kind of behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain because we know the story, it's really incredible how much stuff in this episode, pretty much, apart from the stuff with the Raiders, which is really just an excuse to get a little action sequence in there, because it was the early 90s and that they're proud of their CG, which I've got to admit doesn't look as bad as I remember it looking.
No, I thought it looked fine. It's not going to win any realism awards.
But when you consider that at the time, nobody was using CG on television. They couldn't have done it. They could not have produced this show with models, certainly not on the scope that it will get to at certain points. Like if you think of the shot where you see loads of ships coming out of a jump point, they just couldn't have done it.
No.
You just would not have seen that stuff. And I think that part of how crappy I think the special effects on Babylon 5 is partly informed, not fully, but I think partly informed by watching inferior masters of the show on DVD and recording.
Well, I mean, every wide shot, the last time we watched
it was just blurred.
Oh, it was horrible.
Yeah.
There are several points I'm really looking forward to getting to purely because they were wide shots and they were so out of focus. It felt like I had Vaseline on my eyes.
Yeah, it suddenly felt like you were watching it through a window or something at that point. It was really strange. So there's that. But for me, I thought this was tremendous. I don't ever remember thinking this episode was that great, but watching it now, I think it's because I've seen so much stuff that isn't as good as this since I last saw it. I know that sounds really ridiculous. I've watched so much stuff where I've just been willing it to be as good. So much
it's just not.
but really slick, big budget, made for streaming stuff, and it just doesn't cut it. But to watch this and for every element of it to work, but really, Babylon 5 is at its best when it's people in rooms talking, and you're just so invested.
I think one thing that it benefits from is having so many actors who are obviously quite comfortable on the stage.
Yeah, theatrical actors.
Yeah, rather than film and TV. Because their performances, they are so commanding in their speech and language. They get their point across so well. They have such a great rhythm to their speech. The way they present it,
one of the things that I love
JMS's words
about
actors
so
good.
Like Andreas Katsoulis and Peter Jurasik and Mira Furlan is they're amazing that they can go from being really big to really small. Like I love the way that Londo, he's got this sort of thing that he does where he'll be shouting and he'll be like, "And why should I do?" And he'll catch himself and he'll stop and he'll be like, "Why should I?" And he'll dial it down and give it a kind of humanity and an emotion. And you'll see all of his anger and bravado, but then he'll bring a reality to it in a way that you're not used to in science fiction. And it's so effective.
And seeing Londo and Jakar together, is like a masterclass.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say to people who haven't watched the show before is those two characters take you on such a ride.
Oh, 100%.
And it's funny because this is the second episode on the trot, obviously, because there's only been two, where Jakar is shown as being this scheming antagonist.
Moustache twirling.
Exactly, yeah. And Londo is seen as being this kind of pitiful victim. And I think that...
He's very much the one you're sympathising with.
Yeah. And all I will say is watch this space. It's so interesting what they do. And even if this was all they did, even if for the whole show that was the dynamic, it would still be great. And those actors are brilliant in these roles. But it's so amazing as a rewatch, watching this, knowing what we know, that it's immediately compelling. And the other thing that became really apparent to me in this episode, and I know this is a rewatch, but I remember this at the time, is the razor sharp clarity of the storytelling.
Oh, it's incredible.
You don't know these characters, but you know what they're thinking. Like that moment when they show Londo's nephew and he's talking on the camera and it cuts back and you see Delenn just looking stunned and you know what she's thinking. You know that she's like, oh, shit. Clearly he's saying this at gunpoint, but there's nothing we can do about it because of the politics. And she just somehow conveys that with like her face. I mean, and it's stuff like that that really blows me away about this episode.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I know the pilot was like a TV movie and stuff, but essentially, this is the first episode, and you're getting that level of character nuance communicated non-verbally through prosthetics.
Yeah, and you can see why they changed her prosthetics. Like, I get the comment about, going through that stage of not sure if she's male or female.
Yeah, the androgynous.
But taking some of that prosthetic away from her just opens her up to really finding the vibe in her character.
The other thing as well is that one of the primary influences on Babylon 5, and this will become increasingly apparent as the show goes on, was Tolkien. And what they've also done, and this isn't really a spoiler, but it will become more and more apparent, is basically the Minbari are the elves.
Yes.
And I think that Mira Furlan's just, she was a beautiful woman, she's got an amazing face. There is something quite elven about her. So I think that by removing that, it further solidifies them as being, because in the Lord of the Rings, the elves they're an older race. And, and they talk about that in the last episode. There's a sense that, I suppose a little bit like the Vulcans in Star Trek, that they're kind of the parents of the galaxy.
They've been around for a long time.
And there's mystery. And of course, the Vorlons are shrouded in myth and mystery as well. Mystery, you could call it. So the... I always think of that line in Buffy when that guy's like, I thought he was a myth. And Buffy was like, well, I guess you were a myth taken. There's just silence in the room.
Do you feel better getting that out?
I'm looking, 20 years I've been waiting to actually use that in real life, and the day will come. So I think that's another interesting change. Well, but other things as well, like the music's there. You've got the opening credits. But what...
I saw that it was 2058. Do you know what comes after 2058?
Tell me, Hannah.
2059.
Should we break things down a little bit?
Break it down.
Like So Solid Crew?
Yeah.
Okay, so we open up on Ragish 3 and we get the scene between Michael Garibaldi and the new character, Mr. Susan
Biscuit.
Ivanova. Mr. Biscuit, yeah. And what was it my dad always used to say about Garibaldi biscuits? It looks like dead flies crushed in wafer.
Yeah. Do you know what they were called in New Zealand?
Dead fly biscuits?
Dandy
Wongies? Oh no, that would be Australia, wouldn't it?
They were nicknamed fly traps, but they were actually called full of fruits.
That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
There you go.
Yeah, and
I miss them. I love Garibaldi biscuits.
And that's coming from somebody who's used the word myth taken tonight. So, I mean, you should be insulted by that. One of the things as well that becomes really apparent, particularly when they're paired up, is Jerry Doyle, who plays Garibaldi, and Claudia Christian, who plays Ivanova, are the type of actors who they can have chemistry with anyone.
Yeah.
Literally, you could put them in a scene with anyone and there's chemistry. So them being together, it's like Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd, or it's one of those great chemistry pairings.
Yeah,
you know?
I love when she says, what are you doing at my station, or should I just snap your arms off at the wrist now?
And it's like, I'm in the middle of 15 things, all of them annoying. And I think that there is an element of reality.
I can really sympathise.
Yeah, there is an element of reality to Babylon 5 that isn't with Star Trek, purely because of that absence of utopia. Things in Star Trek are, at least in the original Star Trek and The Next Generation, are absolutely perfect. But what we will see in Babylon 5 is that basically the big difference is there's still money.
Yeah, and as much as you can have in a sci-fi series, there's realism.
Yeah. And they really knew, humans are really new to being in space.
But I found it funny the first time I watched this as well, that Sinclair refers to the Battle of Britain, as well as things that are past events but future for us.
And there's newspapers and elections.
Yeah, and it is very, each race is very politically driven in their own different ways, and you get to see that more as the show progresses. You get to see the structure of how each race exists within itself.
You get the almost like
hierarchy.
Yeah, but the sociology of them as well, and their castes and all that kind of stuff.
But I kind of love that element of it because, don't get me wrong, I love Star Trek, but it does feel very well, this is utopia, but we're all fighting about something this week.
It's utopia for humans, but there's all of these people outside the utopia who are threatening it. Yeah. And you've got to have that for drama.
Of course you do. It'd be a pretty boring show if you didn't.
Yeah. I love the credits opening monologue bit, their equivalent of Space: The Final Frontier, and I've always loved that shot of Sinclair walking around the corner with the gun as he says, "It could be a dangerous place." And I remember that was, to this day, that's a running thing with me and Paul, who I did Tune Striker versus Punter with, where whenever we're talking about Babylon 5 and there's a plot and some twist, it's always like, well, it's a dangerous place, after all. And it's just such a great shot of Sinclair. He's got one eyebrow raised. He's got this kind of fun, smarmy, like I said, Bob Munkhausian kind of vibe about him.
Actually, one thing I thought is when the episode started was, they've all had haircuts.
Yeah. It's always that's the thing with the pilot. We're going from the pilot to series. Yeah. We're introduced to some new characters. Veer, who is Londo's kind of like attaché. Veer Koto, played by Stephen Furst from National Lampoon's Animal House.
I love him. I think he's great.
We see that there's a presidential election going on, and again, the richness of the universe, like the fact that you get an establishing shot and somebody's reading a newspaper, and you can see in the newspaper references to Psychor. And this is a TV show from the early 90s when people had small standard definition, not analog, tube TVs. So it was just, to have that level of detail in there, it really matters. And again, it really adds to the rewatchability as well, because you can be like, oh, look, they're talking about this and they're talking about that. These small bits, things that look like window dressing when you first watch it, that are actually really significant, and upon rewatch enhance the experience of it because you're living in the universe when you're watching the show. That
ties into the Lord of the Rings as well, from the movie point of view, because Mike and I have done a tour of Weta Workshop with our kids and seen all the behind the scenes stuff.
Our kids and other people's kids.
Kids. And the level of detail that they went to with things that you're never going to really notice.
Yeah, and they were there to help the actors immerse themselves.
Yeah, but it's also subconsciously immersing the viewer.
Yeah.
And I think that has the same effect in B5.
It does. I mean, it's in a different.
I mean, like you say, there's lots of viewers who wouldn't have seen anything in
Most.
the newspapers first time around because there was, the viewing, like TVs weren't.
And this was before box sets as well. It was like, it was, you'd watch it once.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that because to me that just shows what a level of passion there is for a project. The people that you've got working on it obviously really care about making it the best that they can be.
Also, it rewards and encourages you to rewatch it. And that's how you create a cult TV show.
100%.
And nothing could touch Star Trek in the 90s. And the fact that Babylon 5 gave it a good old run for its money. It's funny, I've been watching the bonus features for Farscape, which Hannah and I are watching at the moment. And there's a behind-the-scenes documentary that was obviously shot during season 1. And the creator of the show, he keeps talking about how different it is to Star Trek and Babylon 5. And it's so weird thinking, Babylon 5 was for a few years there. I mean, it's sort of been forgotten as a show because it was unavailable for such a long time. It's still not on streaming anywhere. It's never been on Netflix or Disney Plus or anything. And, I
wonder if JMS has ever been approached about it.
About what?
About streaming it.
He doesn't own it. Warner Brothers own it.
Oh,
okay. He was paid. He made the show, but it's a Warner Brothers production. But I
think they'd put it out.
Well, they have. It's out on Blu-ray, but it's just,
you know what I mean.
But it's not like the world that we live in now. It's nobody stands up and walks over to their DVD player and pops a disc in. It's very much. It has to be. If you can't pull it out the air, it may as well not exist as far as finding new audiences goes. Yeah. But there was a time when it was one of the pillars of geekdom, and you would see people who were doing new shows like Farscape doffing their cap to Babylon 5 in the same sentence that they were doing the same for Star Trek or the X-Files or any of those other shows. So we're also introduced to Talia. A great bit of, I'm going to do this.
My son would love you.
I'm going to keep doing this cheesy Sinclair watch, where each episode I'll have my favourite cheesy Sinclair moment because I loved it. And again, this is one of those things where I'm not making fun of him. I think it's perfect. I love it because this was an early 90s show and there is an action-adventure element to it.
We're big fans of Sinclair.
And he has that kind of gee whiz element to him. And the moment in this episode is where he talks about the Battle of Britain and he's talking about, his family tradition. And Ivanova's like, was your dad a pilot? And he just looks out this corner of his eye and just goes, the best. And it's just, that's my cheesy Sinclair moment of the episode. Mm-hmm. And
I mean, that's the point where he's talking about ignore the propaganda and focus on what's in front of you.
Well, they're talking about who they're going to vote for because the election's coming up. I like the fact that they talk about, and this is something he's got in common with Star Trek, it's a recurring thing that whenever Londo is shocked, he always says great maker, because obviously that's the name of their god. And in the same way that there was a line of dialogue in the original 60s Star Trek where somebody talks about the great bird of the galaxy. And after that became Gene Roddenberry's nickname. People refer to him as Great Bird or the Great Bird of the Galaxy. People started, in the fan community, started calling JMS the Great Maker because he was the guy who made the show. And to this day, people still refer to him as that when they're chatting to him on Twitter. So it's nice to know that in a similar way to Star Trek, because this was a much more innocent age for fandom. People only interacted and talked about things that they liked. And it wasn't because the world was better. It was a smaller canvas.
Yeah.
Whereas like now, everybody geek culture is so huge that everybody watches everything and has an opinion. But back then, people would just watch something, and if they didn't like it, they'd stop watching it.
Yeah.
And if they did continue liking it, that was because they liked it. So they generally said nice things about it. It was really simple,
It's too easy to get online these days. Like you actually had to make an effort to go and leave a review of something. So if you were going to do that, you were either going to be furious about it or you were going to like it.
The other sci-fi convention that they've got going on here is if you want to have a true cult TV show, first of all, you have to... One thing that they don't do, actually, that much is, but all the other ones do, is sci-fi swear words that aren't real swear words, but also sci-fi food, and they've got spoo in Babylon 5.
Yeah.
That's a recurring
Very fresh
thing.
Spoo.
One of my favourite deliveries of a line of dialogue, and there's a bunch of them in this episode, is when Jakar is reflecting on the irony of how now it's the Centauri that are getting attacked, and he says, "The wheel turns, does it not?" I've used that in almost exactly that. Like, if ever I'm kind of like, haha, it's your turn, I'm like, the wheel turns, does it not? It's just delicious, you know?
It reminds me of the phrase you use sometimes about it is indeed my privilege and my something, but you repeat the word.
Oh yeah. That's from.
It's my privilege.
It is indeed my privilege and honour to be the guest of honour. It's like, I love it. It's like the Nathan Fillion in Dr. Horrible, when he's that speech where he's like, he's got like the cards of paper, and he's like, "I hate the homeless. This problem in the city."
I love Dr. Horrible.
Best. It's the best. And of course, and they're back and forth as well. What's the matter if you run out of small children to butcher? And the line later on where he's like, do you want revenge? And he's like, oh, I'm not going to lie and say that I don't look forward to the day. Was it where we carve their bones into small flutes for Narn children to play? It's just the darkness of that, and but also it's just so well written and lyrical, and because Jakar, I think even in this episode, you're starting to see that although on the one hand he's the sort of very warrior, lizardy, sort of Klingon-esque kind of character, there is a fanciful, slight dandiness to him.
Oh, very much.
Eloquence, even when he's being villainous. So you're already starting to see that he's not just like a grunting, monster, vicious monster alien. There is something quite almost camp about him.
Yeah.
And he's quite sophisticated.
You can see it when he gets like frustrated with things. Instead of yelling, he's very
he kind of minces off a little bit, doesn't he? Yeah.
And there's a lot of...
It's for Sideshow Bob standing on a trowel noise, isn't it? The kind of... It's he says, and I think that this is almost the key line of dialogue, is when he's losing his shit at Londo and being like, yes, I admit it, we did that. He says, it's our turn now. And that's it, because of course the history here is that they, back in their, Napoleonic days, their kind of imperial phase, one of the great atrocities that the Centauri Republic had was their invasion and habitation enslavement, yeah. And eventually they were sort of pushed away, and they've fallen into the mothballs of history. And now the Centauri, in their own little crap way, are trying to get their revenge. He's saying it's our turn now. So what we're seeing is, the victims become the oppressor. And who's to say that the same thing didn't happen to the Centauri beforehand? And it's like generational abuse almost.
That's what Delen's trying to say, isn't it? That at some point someone has to stop. You can't be still fighting about bloodshed from so many centuries back, and even if the hurt is still there.
And the question the show is asking is that possible? Is it possible to get to Star Trek, to get to the Federation, to get to this utopia? To do that, somebody has to... I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like Christianity. It's the idea that Christ died for our sins. Christ absorbed our sins and all the sin in the world so we could move forward. That's what's behind that story or that reality, depending on what your perspective is. And I think that that's kind of what they're examining here is it possible in human nature, I know we're not just talking about humans, but for somebody to sacrifice themselves and their people and their culture and their world for everyone else. And that's kind of what the show will explore over its entire run in many ways, There's some interesting stuff with Kosh in this episode, and one of the things that I got a note of here, and I'd completely forgotten this, and I remember thinking it at the time, I almost feel like Kosh, because if you figure that this started in 93, 94, is that I feel was very much influenced by Twin Peaks. I feel like Kosh is like the giant in Twin Peaks in the way that he'll rock up and he'll give these cryptic, portentous clues that the show will then examine. And I think that if you look at when the show came out, that was very much still in the zeitgeist. And I remember, like, for example, when Sinclair is talking to him and he says, And again, this is very much like the elves and the older
the Narn
races.
or the Centauri
Yeah.
race,
What he said. Well, before that though, he says, "Let them die." They're basically it's
dying
like
races.
Exactly.
Die out.
And it's almost as though the Vorlons are so powerful that they do just view other people as insignificant, not out of meanness, but just in the way that we would look at insects almost.
I mean, there's an argument for the Vorlons being elves in a way, because they are so above all of the time situations.
Yeah, you're right. There's almost an implication that they, like the elves, are preparing to leave.
Yeah.
Beyond. I think in Babylon 5 they referred to it as going beyond the rim, which is Babylon 5's equivalent of going to the Grey Havens, essentially.
Maybe the Vorlons are like the Numenorians.
Yeah,
or maybe the Minbari are like Numenorians and the Vorlons are the elves.
I see what you're getting at, but I feel like...
I mean, I don't think it's that literal.
I feel like the Vorlons and the Minbari are both the elves, but just at a different stage in their evolution.
Yeah.
Like the
Vorlons are older.
The Vorlons are like the elves are in Lord of the Rings. And the Minbari are like they were in like the Silmarillion and like the early books, the early tales,
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. And Rings of Power era.
But it almost feels as though in several thousand years, humanity will be... So it's almost as though, we're all elves, dude. It's just a question of how far along the, the elven path.
It's a bit like capsicums or bell peppers if you're American. They all start off green, but if you leave them long enough, they go red.
Bloody profound, that is.
Yeah. And you get yellow and orange, and can you tell I'm growing them in my garden at the moment?
G'Kar tells Sinclair about the Centauri stripping his planet, and this is where we get the bones into Flutes for Narn Children line. And what we also learn is that the Narn supplied humans with weapons during their war of the Minbari. Remember that, first-time viewers. That might come in useful later. And Delenn talks about this cycle of hatred. So what we're starting to see is Delenn was a very mysterious, mercurial figure. But what we're seeing here in this episode, and again, I think partly this is because of the makeup not being there, or maybe this is the reason why the makeup's not there, is you're starting to get a sense that she has, and this might be legitimate or not, a real strong... She projects a strong sense of empathy. Like she is very much kind of like, come on, dudes, pull it together. She's got that kind of esoteric quality. All this, like I say, all the stuff with the Raiders is very, it ties into the main plot, but I think it is very much, they're kind of like, okay, guys, it's 1993. This is a sci-fi show. We're going to have dudes in spaceships shooting at shit at some point in the episode.
Got to have like an Arnie Hostel Vista line. Yeah,
exactly. And also, I think they wanted to take the CGI effects out for a test drive a little bit as well, and I get that.
Yeah.
And
it's good having Sinclair be the one who kind of shoots the shit out of the bad guys.
Yeah. The other sign that we get that Earth isn't quite where Star Trek is when Sinclair's talking to that bureaucrat on the video monitor, and he's basically just saying, look, this is not a problem. Just stay out of it. Let them figure it out. We've got an election coming up. And that wouldn't happen in Star Trek, And then later in the episode, of course, you get a very weary-looking Sinclair, right at the end, sitting on his sofa, and we see that Santiago, the male candidate, has won. And you get the feeling that, he's not very happy about it. And what we hear...
He sort of has that same shit, different day kind of vibe.
He does, but specifically, we hear the news reporter talking about Santiago's policies, which are kind of pro-Earth, somewhat isolationist. Let's solve our own problems and not put money into space, which obviously, when you're the commander of a diplomatic space station,
it's not what you want.
Doesn't bode well for your future funding or just for the sort of the political placement of where you are, because he's there because he believes in the mission. He wants everyone to come together and get their kumbayas out,
Well, and he's also seeing it on the front line. He knows
the value,
the issues and he knows the issues they're facing and the value of having Babylon 5 there.
Yeah. I love it when Londo makes the gun, how it's all these little...
it's very Inspector Gadget.
Well, I love the way
it.
it's all these little bits and he's getting them, and then he gets the last bit, which just looks like a gun. And he puts the other 2 bits on it, and I'm kind of like, well, what's the point in disguising it? Because it's not like, no, it's a batter blender. You know what I mean? Yeah. But there's a lot of really nice small moments in this episode, like when Garibaldi confronts him. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's a really well acted scene. They're really earnest, but there's some nice character exchanges at the end of it where he's like, you know, would you really have done it? And he's like, yeah, I would have.
The paperwork's pain in the bum.
Yeah, and that's a Bruce Willis line. It's like, you know, so Santiago wins, and again, and right near the end of the episode, you get a tour de force scene between Ivanova and Talia, and I think Claudia Christian is wonderful in that scene because she doesn't blame her.
No, she doesn't blame her.
It's really complex.
Equally, she's quite upfront in saying, I'm probably still not going to like you tomorrow.
Because of what you represent.
Because of what you represent.
But she
also...
not
personal.
But she also pities her. And there's a lot going on in that scene. But I also do love the fact that it was 1993, so it looks like they're in an 80s cocktail bar.
100%.
And again, it's one of those things...
I love the fact that she's wearing a necklace. I mean, it seems so at odds with her very military...
Yeah, masculine.
Uniform that she's been wearing up until this point. She's got this very... flowing top on, and a little beaded necklace and a hair out, and
Claudia Christian, it was really, really funny because I interviewed her and it was a video call, and she looks like she leads the most chaotic life because I called and she was on her phone, and I must have been on with her for about 20 minutes before we even started the interview. Like she had a dog under her arm, she was cooking. Somebody delivered parcels and she was chatting to them at the door, and then joined. I was just like, "You are exhausting." And she lived in like, I don't know whether she's got a lot of money or her partner had a lot of money, but she was like in this real housewives of whatever it is, you know, one of the real big reality TV show mansion almost, and it was a really
that B5 money.
And I was in our bedroom in our first house in with the kind of rental property slidey window doors on the wardrobe behind me as well. It was very different worlds coming together. Yeah. So you know, we also, as I mentioned before, we do get a lot of mythology here. We get a sense what's happening is in the show is once again the characters that we're meeting from Psychor feel like good people, feel like heroic figures, feel like part of our crew on the show. But everything that we're hearing about Psychor and all of the iconography and imagery does have an Orwellian, fascistic, unsettling, dystopian quality to it.
Absolutely. Black leather gloves and
these are
the colour of the uniform.
And these are humans. These are on Earth. These aren't bad guys. These aren't the other people. This is inside the world that the show inhabits. Yeah. And I remember even at the time thinking that was interesting. But again, because it's a fun 90s show, you know, we end on that kind of him trying to go to sleep and then the alarm going off and it's like, right, back into action. So I think in some ways, you know,
you've forgotten the best scene.
What's that?
The cartoons and Delenn looking at the popcorn.
Not knowing how to eat it.
What is this?
My friend Dan is exactly the same as Garibaldi when he watches old Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
I think Dan's probably the only person that I've ever met that laughs like that at cartoons like that.
Like genuinely. But then again,
it's not put on. It really tickles him.
He also eats ice cream like an infant. You know how our kids will have ice cream all over their face. That's Dan after he's had an ice cream. Yeah. It's really incredible. Yeah, he's a
special little guy.
He is very, very Garibaldi-esque in that. But any final thoughts, Hannah, before we wrap up?
I thoroughly enjoyed this episode, and I'm just excited to get cracking into more.
I'm really looking forward to watching all of Babylon 5 with that level of high fidelity picture quality as well.
Yeah,
that's 100%. Going to be a real treat.
Should we talk about, before we get into it, do you have any spoilers?
A couple, yeah.
Okay. Before we get into that, can we talk about the next episode maybe at this point?
Okay, let's do that. So just for those of you that are joining us for the first time. We are going to say goodbye to those of you who have not watched Babylon 5 before, because we do try and avoid spoilers that occur for episodes after the point we're up to in our rewatch. But if you have watched Babylon 5 before, then we would invite you to return in a moment for that. But before we break away, Hannah, what would you like to...
So our next episode will be episode 2, which is called Soul Hunter. Synopsis says, a mysterious alien who steals the souls of the living arrives on the station, putting Delenn's life in danger. It's directed by Jim Johnston and again written by JMS.
Alrighty, so quick reminder that we do appreciate feedback. Rewatch Project podcast@gmail.com, or alternatively just leave comments here on the channel. Check out our friend shows. We take donations through PayPal. So if you would like to support the show, please only do so, though, if you can, without causing yourself any financial hardship. Also, Apple Podcasts and Spotify reviews and likes and subscriptions and set your alerts and do all that YouTube stuff as well. We'll be back in a minute with some spoilers, but if you're not joining us, we will see you soon.
Bye.
Yeah, so I've got a few spoilers. A couple of things I sort of wanted to point out. I mean, obviously, you know, you've got all of the election stuff, all of the Earth for Earthling stuff. And, you know, we're going to get a complete reversal of Jakar and Londo. You know, I mean, that's a big element of the show.
And I remember on the last watch, which was my first time watching, how I just hated Jakar at this point.
Yeah.
Like in the best possible way. I thought he was going to be the bad guy, and you know, that was it. And he ends up being one of my favorite characters. Along with Londo. The two of them are just a tour de force to watch from start to finish. And there are points in the series that you hate Londo.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to.
Yeah.
And you know, and vice versa. My spoiler was about Ivanova's parentage, and they totally unspoiled it in the episode.
What do you mean they unspoiled it?
Well, they talked about it.
Oh, okay, yeah. But of course, we learned that Ivanova has some of that in her as well.
Yes,
and
yes.
has to hide it as well.
There's that level of it as well. I mean, don't her and Talia end up in a relationship?
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, it's come a long way.
And this idea of old claims for territory as well. I mean, we're seeing that in the real world now, aren't we? All the stuff about the Narns supplying weapons to Earth, you probably won't remember, because I only remember because I've watched it about 4 times. That's a huge plot point in the beginning, the prequel movie, when Sheridan, who's not in the show yet, and Jakar first meet, because it's set during the Earth Minbari War, and that's how Jakar comes into the storyline. He's in the supplying that.
Yes,
so
I do vaguely remember.
So I love the fact that this Babylon 5 movie that was made years later has a huge part of its storyline dictated by one line of dialogue in the first episode of the show. You know, and I think that's a really great example of a TV show that essentially springs from the mind of one person. I mean, I think that there are other writers on the show. Yeah. We do see episodes coming up written by other writers who are friends of JMS's, but he story edited every episode. And I think once you get in, I think about halfway through season 2, I think there's only one episode in the rest of the show that isn't written by him. So
far, there's been a couple of story edit credits for other people, but not writing credits.
No. I mean, I think that there's like 111 episodes, and I think he writes like about 97 of them, which is insane.
It really is.
When you consider how many. I mean, this isn't like somebody writing 8 episodes of a HBO show. I mean, and people now talk about that like it's this Herculean act that somebody has managed to do that. But this guy, I mean, I remember...
I think that consistency of voice, though, is one of the strongest elements.
Well, it's the world building.
The show.
It's the world building. And I mean, I remember him doing a talk at a convention that I was at. And this was during production of season 4. somebody said to him, "What's your normal day?" And it was insane. He said, he's like, "I'll get up at 5 o'clock in the morning." He's like, "I'll write until 9 o'clock. Then I'll go on set for the entire day." He's like, "I'll get home at 8 o'clock at night. I'll write until 10 o'clock. He's like, "Then I'll go on the message boards," because this was very early internet. And he's like, and chat with fans for a couple of hours. He's like, "I'll get 3 hours sleep, get up the next morning and write." And he did that for 5 years. And it's like the Obama thing. He did a thing where he showed a photograph of him at the beginning and at the end of doing Babylon 5. And he looked like he'd aged 20 years. And a lot of the time people are like, "Oh, why has JMS never done anything like Babylon 5? And I honestly believe that I think he's just used up all his gas. I think every story, every idea, every piece of creative energy he's got. I mean, that's exaggerating a little bit because he's a great writer and he writes a lot of comic books. He still does great work. You know, I mean, he still writes. I mean, he wrote Thor, the MCU movie. You know, he wrote that The Changeling, you know, the Angelina Jolie movie. So he still works and does a lot of stuff. But I think
he hasn't lost his skill. It's just, You know
what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings films.
I was just about to say, it's the same experience.
I just think that Peter Jackson just put everything. He put everything he had, and I think afterwards. It's why George Lucas didn't direct another film after the original Star Wars until The Phantom Menace, 30 years later. It just did him in.
Well, I mean, watching the behind the scenes of Lord of the Rings and seeing Peter Jackson literally cycling between departments because
the physical trauma that making those films
quickly, and
it's insane. It's like the busiest week of your work life,
for
7 days a week for nearly a decade. You know, and let's be honest, Peter Jackson was, he doesn't look like has the fastest metabolism in the world. Let's put it that way.
He's looking a lot better these days than he was back then.
Yeah. Well, he's probably got But anyway, tangents. Yeah, we'll be back very soon. We'll be talking about Soul Hunter. That was the name of the episode, wasn't it? Episode 2. I'm really glad that we're watching a show that has a really simple numbering system for its episodes. And
what the next one? Guess what the number is?
It's episode 2.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Do you know what comes after that?
No, but I know what year it's set. All right, let's get out of here. We'll see you again soon, guys. Thanks for watching.
See you later.
Or listening. Bye-bye.